Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 350. If you've used a generative AI tool, you know that providing more quality context can lead to better output. What if we could apply that same principle to our communication with other humans? Milin Desai, the CEO of Sentry, says contextualizing your communication will change the way you operate. Well, if you missed part one of our discussion with Milin in episode 349, we talked about his decision to pursue computer science and computer engineering and the path that led him all the way to technical marketing engineer. We talked about that unique trait of being able to understand technology and business value. Milin shared with us some thoughts on mentorship as a stream of active conversations, and he talked about how curiosity led to developing relevance. This week in part two of our discussion with Milin, we're going to talk about contextual communication. What exactly is it, and how has Milin used it over time to make himself successful? We'll follow Milin through his experience moving up the chain and taking on different leadership levels, and we'll talk about some of the changes in the skills that he needed to focus on to be successful at each of those levels. And then how can we evaluate opportunities in our career based on scope and upside? It might not be something that takes you in a straight line. Milin gives a great example of this. So if you want the full context, listen closely to part two of our discussion with Milin Desai.
Live in the life, live in the shoes of your customer. Understand what they want, empathize with that, and from there, magic will happen.
I like that.
Same. I think one of the things you said without maybe stating it explicitly was we need to do a better job of asking people more questions to understand where they're coming from. Do that discovery, whether I'm working on a product team, as a sales engineer, in internal IT, working a ticket for someone. What is it that you actually need to do? What do you care about? Great point.
Context, right? AI is best when given the best context. So contextualize every conversation. And if you contextualize every conversation, it will change how you operate. You get a support ticket, you solve it, you see the two other things that are somewhat related, and you send a note saying, I solved your thing, but I also noticed something else. Here's a little link to the doc. Now you've just built another opportunity. You solved my problem, but here's a correlated thing. That's that extra step. And as a manager, I should not have to tell you that. Like, there are people who just do it. That's when you just know. You know, everybody rates themselves as the best, by the way. There are very few people who are self-aware in that, right? So, including myself, by the way. That self-assessment is super important. And that extra juice that people are looking for is that contextualization, that personalization, that dot connecting. That is what will change you. And that comes with being curious, asking the questions, listening, active listening. By the way, active listening is very hard for me personally. I love to talk, but it's something I've gotten better at.
I think you said something or touched on something really interesting. Whether it's working a tech support ticket or answering a customer question, sometimes the question that is asked is not the question that they want the answer to. And it is up to us to not act like an LLM and just answer the question that was asked. It's to go that extra mile and to ask extra questions. Wait, why is this happening? In what context are you trying to do this? And that's something that's super powerful. I think that people in their career journeys don't understand, like, I don't know, I answered all the questions that I was asked. Okay.
For people who are thinking like solution engineers, product managers, people who are in the customer facing role, here's an interesting one for you. I think it was Paul Maritz who said this. There is not a single product pitch that I've seen that I don't like. What he really meant by that is like, to people like me, when you come in with a product idea and the next thing you know, I'm giving you 3 other suggestions to go change it or tweak it, maybe your original plan is not the original plan anymore, right? And so a lot of times that validation comes from active listening and questions. You go in and you pitch and everybody's like talking about da-da-da-da-da, but you forgot to ask a simple question. In the next 6 months, if you had $1 to spend, would you spend it on this? We forget to ask the most important question. If I'm going to build it, will you use it? Will you buy it? We go with happy ears saying they loved everything we shared, they loved the feature, and then comes time for activation. We don't even know why the activation numbers are low. This is an example from my VMware days, but you almost kind of find out why will they use it versus assuming they will use it when you pitch it to them, right? And pushing them and saying, where does it stack in your priority rank or whatever it is? And by the way, same principles apply to development and everything else in our life too, which is if you only had an hour a day, what would you do with it? Start thinking that way, it makes things very, very simple.
I love the question you asked there. Would you spend money on it? And for somebody who's trying to get a project approved because they're in customer-facing IT, in the next 6 months, would you approve this project if you think it's a good idea because I've brought it to you and you weren't thinking about it? And if they say no, okay, I'll stop there.
Correct.
That's great.
Yeah. How far out in your priority list would this be?
You had that question. They say not, you're not on the list. The natural thing a lot of people do is they will, if you have like 30-minute meeting, this is done in the first 7 minutes, right? So you have 23 minutes left. You have 2 options. A lot of people almost like, oh, but let me tell you what I'm building, which is the mistake. So you're just going to waste 23 minutes. Or you will just say, okay, we're done. But what if you spend the next 5 minutes asking, what is the most important things you're thinking through? Because yes, it may not be the current thing you're doing, but it may, again, coming back to knowing what other people in the company are doing. It could be connected to another initiative, another project, another product that the team is building. So coming back to the same curiosity thing that we talked about and knowing what's happening around you, you may find something or you may just learn. You're just learning about the organization, the company in that regard. A lot of these simple, basic things is about just taking that deep breath, especially in customer-facing roles and saying, tell me what you are really thinking, right? And people will open up. You'll be surprised once you show the ability to say, sorry, I suck, or what I'm building is not relevant. People are like, okay, great. You just saved me time. Can you tell me what is relevant for you? And then from there, a plethora of things could happen. Your knowledge expands automatically. That's the win. But if you inherently are a team player at the company, you could open doors for other teams, other products, other initiatives, or nothing comes out of it. And it's great. But you came ahead as a high IQ individual who's saving them time, who cares about them more than they care about selling a product. Huge win in the long scheme of things.
And that might give you all kinds of ideas. Even though you came to present the option for Project X, once they tell you what's important, you may get a way better idea.
Exactly.
And I think you're also touching on something that you said earlier, where you have to empathize with the customer and live in their shoes. And part of that job is to collect that information about what their priorities are and report back to the organization. Hey, as interesting as we think this is, and as cool as our science project is, what the customer actually cares about, as I've had these conversations with 5, 10, 30 people, is not what we're doing XYZ, it's A and B and C.
So 2 points on that. Career marketing advice on this one, right? A lot of people try to go at it alone. What I mean by that, they will say, I'll go on the customer call, I will do everything, you know what I mean? And then I will synthesize the information and bring it, right? It started at Riverbed, but I really put into play at VMware. I would bring my engineers. So Malik Mahalingam, who then founded a company and is now at Intuit, I would get him and others on the call with me. And it's crazy because, people are like, oh, product manager is supposed to get the feedback. And I'm like, no, come listen, not the first call. It's like, as you develop, you're like, why don't you listen in? Because the interpretation of that conversation can be very different. So number one, after that call is finished, you ask for their interpretation. Did they have happy ears? Did you have happy ears? But more importantly, you as a team get on the same page about the opportunity. They start feeling like this person is doing their job. They're bringing me into the process. They know what they're talking about. Most people will be like, I spoke to 7 customers. You should be building it this way. And a natural reaction from an EM or someone is like, what do you know? And there's that classic conflict, right? But why can't we just have the conversation or bring them into multiple conversations with the customer, let them listen in? We didn't have recordings and all that stuff then, but recordings still take time. It takes away the human element in it. So I think that participation is really important. And the second most important thing in any career progression, anything from non-tech or tech, is communication. Contextual communication. Who are you communicating to? You're communicating to your engineering team. Have them feel like they were in the conversation, right? Don't tell them, based on my 10 conversations, you shall build this feature. No, give them a synthesis of, here are the problems we talked through and here's what happened. So that storytelling communication becomes important because they feel like they're getting the full perspective around it. So similarly, talking to a VP versus an EVP versus a CRO, everyone is different. We as humans don't spend enough time on contextual communication in our personal or professional lives. And I would say the single biggest thing I see people make a mistake on is not invest in communication. Written form communication. Again, you don't have to be an extrovert. Here are my thoughts. 1, 2, 3. And then iterate, sleep over it, marinate, run, or do all that stuff. When they feel formed, share it with a group. Here's where we should be going if you're like some kind of senior leader, right? So 2 things like I would say just super important is try to bring, if possible, your co-partners in crime in these conversations. And number 2 is spend time writing down your thoughts, your analysis, and contextualize it and spend time on it, right? I also will, last point on this communication thing, if it takes you more than 10 minutes to write the first draft, you've already overdone it because it should feel natural and then you clean up the storytelling arc and everything else, right? People spend too much time sometimes and the time is lost too. So it should feel natural, it should feel intuitive, and then you can kind of work around the ranks. But those two become really, really important. Has helped me be successful to where I am right now.
I think that second point especially touches on something that's come up a lot in our discussions, which is writing is thinking. If you have a thought in your head and it's transient and it just evaporates, is that thinking or is that just a transient idea? When you articulate it in the written word and you can read it back and understand it, a week later, and then you can expose it to other people who might have conflicting views or slightly different context and have different ideas and have a conversation about it, and it stands the test of time, then that's really thought and evolution of thought.
By the way, just to put a pin on this was Martin Casado, who started Nicira, who's now a GP at Andreessen. I had the good fortune of working for him and alongside him. And he said this thing, you don't think in PowerPoints and you should write things down. And I started my journey of writing stuff down. And even to this day, I will be going on a train ride and something comes up and I'm like the start a new email, save in drafts guy. I write my thoughts down and then 24 hours later, 48 hours later, maybe sometimes a week later, I go back to that point and clean it up and then bring it to a broader audience. So the 2 things he said was you don't think in PowerPoints and you have to think like a story. I keep bringing some very common points. Hopefully that makes sense, right? The art of storytelling allows you to bring a point of view to the world.
I feel like that's a great way to prep for an interview and to share what you've been working on. For some of those scenario-based questions, write it, wait a couple days, rewrite it. I like that.
If you do an internship, and we've had some young folks go, and I asked them the question, did you get something out of this internship? And I say, make sure you have a narrative around this. If you choose not to come back to Sentry for a full-time job, when somebody asks you what you did, you have a compelling narrative around what happened and what you learned, and you're just giving enough depth. And then you're like, I pushed this to production and it went to this many people and I learned this, right? You're absolutely right. You need to own the narrative and drive it, but you need to find that balance between too much, too little, too boasty, or not telling enough about yourself, right?
Sure. And I would imagine that narrative not only comes from a different lens, but has different elements of brevity and depth as you move up, as you did from individual contributor through software engineering and technical marketing, product management, even up to general manager of a business unit, for example. How did you see that narrative depth and brevity changing as you were practicing this?
It's been the hardest thing. Communication, written form communication is just overall hard. Again, I'll come back to this very important point. Be self-aware, be self-critical, but again, don't get into your confidence. I just want to make sure everybody understands when I keep saying these things, it's not about breaking your confidence, it's knowing who you are and then improving on it. I'm fairly verbose. I'm either very verbose or I'm very succinct. You know what I mean? Like writing a story, narrating it was something I have had to build on, and it has taken me time to get there. And even now, I would say I can get to the story arc really good, but then to write the story is still not natural to me. Hopefully, AI tooling will help me with that, but I am very good with story arcs. And so that's been my kind of strength, right? I can get you to understand the core, the why very quickly. But then when I have to kind of maybe make it a little bit of a medium form or long form, I continue to struggle in that. And so that's been work in progress. And to answer your question, yes, that's the contextual communication piece of it, right? Which is even as a general manager, when you're doing an all hands and you've got or the CEO, you're doing an all hands, you could give a lot of information and then you lose half the audience. So most times you'll find an intermediate ground and then you wait for Q&A. And then from the Q&A is where you learn where you need to fill in the gaps. So then I fill in the gaps either through offline mechanisms, or I will have an active set of smaller forum meetings to address those questions that may have come to kind of fill in the blanks. So it's a two-form kind of communication at that point in time. It took me a while to get there, and it takes practice to take 3 pages and make it 1 page and make it relevant. It's really art. And I'm hoping like AI tooling helps with it and practice helps with it. And just knowing your audience, right? Contextual communication, knowing your audience, what they would care, what's the hook. Through that journey, it's been a lot of iteration and practice.
I think we kind of naturally slipped into talking about your time at VMware.
Speaking of that transition, there's a very important aspect to that transition that might be relevant to the audience. I loved my time at Riverbed. Amazing people. But I had hit a wall of some sort. And I was feeling it, even though, again, like I said, I was doing really well and everything else. So the interesting thing about the transition is, in aggregate, I took a step down in every aspect of it, dollar, cents, everything else. 6 months into taking that role at VMware, the Riverbed stock doubled and split. Just so that you have a context of, so leaving at that point in time in my life. But I had zero regret. And this is super important. Why did I move? I moved because I had wanted to spread my wings more and looked like the organization that I love could not make that happen. So I had to do something about it. I waited and then I moved on. People talk about humans leaving companies and stuff, and everybody has their own reason and everything else. I always say, be patient. Don't make abrupt decisions. Take your time. Leave the place better than when you joined it. Always make sure that you don't leave that organization in a bad place. Gave them the chance, everything, but I had to take a step down to make that step up. I got lucky. Again, good choice, good people, great mentors at VMware. But I had to make that difficult choice. And so people said, oh, something must have been wrong. No, nothing was wrong with the company. People were great. They had a good trajectory. I had reached a point where I needed to spread my wings. And that opportunity was not showing up. So I made the call. 2 things people again forget is career trajectory does not always have to be a step up. It can be sideways, a step down. You look at the opportunity And at VMware, they were like, hey, networking. And nobody knew networking at VMware. It was an interesting, important area. And I felt like, oh my goodness, this will be a great opportunity for me to do something interesting. And everything worked out. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, I'm going to be SME and let's go try it. You know what I mean? So I looked at scope, upside, and then I believed that if the scope and upside would work out, things would work out for me. And they did. I got lucky. Again, great people. My first manager, Yushen was this amazing manager who just let me be me, did never block me, almost like accelerated my flying, like gave me extra wings, never took the spotlight off of me for himself. When the time came, just said, move, I'll move out of the way, you go do what you need to do. And I have so many instances of this at VMware of people. Another person, Hatem Naguib, did something similar for me, just gave me more wings. It's crazy. I'm telling you, people make people. In this case, like I said, optimize for scope, optimize for upside. If that means you need to take a little detour, so be it. It will work out. And in this case, I did not know many people. So that was a risk I took for the scope. But the people turned out to be one of the most amazing things again. So
can you tell us a little bit about that, the differentiation between, first line management, second line management, kind of getting to that VP level? Like, there's definitely a difference in role at each of those points. And sometimes I think that people don't realize that as you move up, it's almost like you're throwing away a big chunk of the skills that you learned in the last role, and you have a whole bunch of new skills that you need to learn to actually do the role that you've now gotten to.
The first thing I'm going to tell you is management is hard. You should know you want it because it's more than you. It's more than you because you have, of course, team members working for you. And then you have this additional burden of translating kind of what the organization wants from you and your organization. And so, number one, I think I want everybody kind of walking into that role to realize that it's a lot of work and it will never get easy. So I think to your broader question about those skills, you learn as you go. I don't think you can take a class. I think if you're lucky enough to have great managers before you, you will know what a great manager looks like. Here's the common pitfall. At least it's been a pitfall for me. I knew what a great manager looked like because they let me be me and they would give me context and they would let me run and they had high expectations and let it rip. You know what I mean? And so when I became a manager, I was very good for the people who were just like, got it, pop, you know what I mean? But then there's a set of people who work with a different style than yours, or they're operating in a much more thoughtful manner. So I think my biggest learning was adjusting to the different forms of value that people bring. I'm not talking about talent level. I'm talking about just the way they bring value, the way they operate, and just making sure that I could create a forum for enabling that.
It sounds like what you're saying is we have modeled for us the ways that we ourselves are effectively managed, right? So naturally we learn that very well, but that doesn't mean that we automatically know how to manage people who aren't managed that exact same way, who need
100%.
Different types of guidance, maybe different structure, maybe different guardrails, something along those lines. Is that an accurate restatement?
That's very correct. To this day, I struggle with this, by the way. I am point me in a direction and we'll figure it out kind of person. So if you're to manage me, it's like, you don't have to worry about it. I got you. I'll come to you with problems. I'll get the most out of you, Mr. Manager or Miss Manager. You know what I mean? Like, I will get what I want. That 1.5 years when they asked me to move changed me, right? I still to this day operate sometimes under that kind of construct. Learning this other part of it, it took time and that was kind of a skill in that regard. And then jumping from level 1 to level 2 or level 3, there's a point in time when it's not about you or what you bring to a team. It's about who you can hire. So what I mean by that is, till I was a director, even maybe a senior director, I had my team and I had a lot of great ICs and everything else. Up the ranks to be a vice president at a large public company, the conversation was, can you bring in senior talent, exceptional senior talent? That was a whole different thing And I'm like, oh, that's what you want? I can go figure that out. You know what I mean? But like, it didn't again come naturally to me because I'm like, I'm running the business. We are making money, da 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 da. But there's a whole other organizational aspect of it, which is this comes back to if you bring in the right people, you automatically become potentially a great manager because they unburden you. They understand you really well. It's kind of like this cascading effect in there. And so bringing on the right people as you move kind of through the ranks, that really helps. Another aspect of it is bring people smarter than you and be comfortable with it. I've never had that problem, but people do have that problem. If you bring smart people, they may eventually replace you, and then maybe that's a kick in the butt you needed. The point of the matter is leave the organization in a better place. So hiring the right people, I would say even moving on from people is something you learn, to your point, as you move, which is one is performance management. You're not doing well, it's great, right? Another is this idea of what I'm calling active management. So there's a point in time where a person could be doing everything they're supposed to be doing. They've been with the organization, but the organization has shifted. Your priorities have shifted. You're in a different size scale, whatever it is. They're still doing what they was doing, but now you're at a different scale and a different game or expectations, and this person is not able to adapt to it. It's a company transitioning at that point. It's not the person. And the ability for you to quickly recognize that for this phase of the journey, somebody you had loved before is not going to work out is probably one of the hardest things you will do as a people leader.
I can imagine that that's very difficult. It's something that I think I mentioned earlier, right? Like when I was at Google, they said, oh, you have to re-architect the entire product when you like get 10x the users. Well, sometimes you also have to re-architect the people organization. And the person who was, senior director in an organization that's 10x the size or post-IPO versus pre-IPO, that person isn't necessarily effective as a senior director in that new organization. So I guess I had never really thought about it, but of course that makes sense.
And so that's where I think it gets misconstrued because everything becomes performance, scope, but there is a journey of a organization. It is a living, breathing thing, and it goes through its own phases. And through that phase, there are some people who grow through every phase and continue to be part of the organization. Some will grow through phase 1, not be part of phase 2. Some will be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but not be part of phase 4. So as you see, there'll be people later in their careers who know who they are and they opt in to saying, I am only for startups that are greater than 10 million in ARR and up to 100. After that, I don't enjoy it. Or I'm the person who's known as a scaler. I would say that is also not that great because you want to be adaptable to the scope or the opportunity. But I just wanted to bring this point up, which is, I remember bringing on talent. I was super lucky to bring in my best friend, my best man, decided to work for me, and it worked out. His name is Nikhil Kelshikar, amazing guy. But like we worked together and built a team. And then there were other people who joined, Brian Desai, Suresh Thuru, who helped me kind of scale the team. So that hiring senior talent, the way Martin and others told me, Raghu and Martin, is like, we need to free up your bandwidth from the day to day, so that we can pull you into other aspects of things, or you can think a little bit bigger. We know you think bigger, but like imagine if you had more time and, so it's one of those things. I think this part which we just talked about is super important, which is there's a time when somebody who was a perfect fit no longer is a fit, and how to have that conversation to identify that and to make that person successful in a different role in the company or something else. Those were the things I think I had to kind of learn, to your point, at these different levels. And it's hard. Letting go of people is hard. Luckily, I've not had to do that in terms of like the business not doing well. You know how that works, right? But yeah, like through that journey, the thing that has inherently worked, continues to work, is writing down my intention for the org, for the team, for the company, what we will bring to the table, and keeping that written and clean 24/7. It doesn't become stale. Like, you write something and 3 months later, you go and tweak it to make sure it's still fresh. You revisit the points. So do an 18-month strategy, but you go clean it up every 3 months. That has been the consistent point of help over there. besides having great people to work for.
Yeah. By keeping that iterative, fresh, clear, it kind of cascades down to helping a leader like yourself understand what the job requirements and descriptions should be. Even if they never got formally updated, I think that's where it starts and flows down. Just my commentary, not really a question.
It helps with everything, by the way. If you have it written down, you probably know this, right? It's super hard to cascade a point of view or vision. You have to repeat it multiple times, multiple forums and everything else. But if that itself is stale, it's not up to date, people cannot go to some place, it becomes really hard. So I still to this day tell everyone, give me a one-pager of where you're taking the team for the next 3 to 6 months. If you don't have that, how will you be effective? Because it's not a feature or function or, it's not like an OKR. It's like directionally we are trying to solve these 3 problems, right? And then you have the measurements of how you do it. But longer term, these are the 4 problems we saw. It's written down. And then you revisit it as a team. When you do a little offsite or you do a little team meeting, saying, are these still relevant? I want you all to think about it. Active participation, right? Now they get a point of view on are the 3 things next 6 months we agree, and the 4 things long term, maybe we need to change or something like that. So that allows for active participation. I would say that's another great thing I learned as my roles, started getting bigger and the scope started getting bigger.
I'm sure you learned from that conversation that contextual communication has a lot of different angles and layers to it. If we're verbally communicating with one another, I can share the context with you, my context, verbally, and I can also gain context from asking you good questions that help me understand where you're coming from, the space in which you're working, the problem you're trying to solve, what you're trying to accomplish, what's important to you. We can also provide context to people through writing. This is a practice that Milin has done for many years. He'll write a draft of his thoughts and he'll iterate on it. He'll further develop it. He'll clarify it. He'll continue to look back on it to keep it fresh and make sure that it's not stale. You have to do that kind of thing when you're a CEO trying to communicate your vision. You want to make sure that it's easy to communicate, that people can understand the full context that you want them to. There are a couple other really good episodes I'd highly recommend you go listen back to that emphasize the importance of writing. Duncan Epping joined us in episode 303, and he talked about using writing as a tool to learn technical concepts. And it was this iteration of rewriting what he had started with that helps Duncan learn. Not only that, but to teach back and convey those concepts through presentations to other people. Jason Belk talked about this concept of developing a narrative, a career narrative, in episode 284. And do you know where he started developing that narrative? It was through writing. He wrote down that narrative that he wanted to share. He iterated on it, not only in written form, but he iterated on the version of that narrative that he would tell in conversations. So you can develop those thoughts in writing. You can also develop them in communicating them verbally. But if you're going to draft and crystallize a narrative, that could really help you in job interviews. Just know that it definitely will take refinement. The first draft isn't going to be the one that's the best way to communicate what you have to say. So be patient. Make sure you look back at what you're trying to say. Make sure it's really what you're trying to say, and refine it over time. So what's in store for part 3 next week? You'll have to wait to find out. See you then.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.
I wanted to talk about this story before kind of answering that question, which you may have to repeat the question again because I got too involved in the story.
Sure. Yeah. Let me just repeat the question. I have no idea what I said. To be clear.